Thank you, Jason. My name is Sean Metcalf, and this is Red versus Blue, Modern Active Directory Attacks, Detection, and Protection. I'll put my glasses on. Much better. I'll cover standard Active Directory attack methods and some ways to detect them and defend against them. I'm the CTO of Dan Solutions, an IT services company focused on Microsoft platform, engineering, and security solutions. And as Jason mentioned, I'm one of about 100 Active Directory Microsoft certified masters in the world. My focus is on Active Directory security, and I regularly post results of my research to adsecurity.org. So it's more important than ever for defensive teams to understand current attacks. As Chris Evans was talking about this morning, in order to fully understand how to defend against attacks, you really need to see what they are and how they work, and understand what that attack detail is. So I cover some of the better known attack methods as well as a couple of new ones, which is being shown here for the first time. The talk also covers a brand new forged Kerberos ticket along the lines of golden and silver tickets, which are used for persistence. The average detection time of a breach was over 6 months in 2014, and most of those organizations didn't detect it themselves. Someone else told them about it. So this is a post-exploit talk. So everything that you just heard about malware, that has happened already, and now it's the next step. What does the attacker do once they get on the system, once they get in the network? And we start this talk with the understanding that the perimeter is compromised regularly. Perimeter defenses used to be enough. The castle's high outer wall and moat are not enough anymore because attackers have gotten really good at swimming and climbing. And of course, email goes right through the perimeter defenses. So a layered defense is what's necessary, from the outer moat and castle walls to several interior walls. Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy, France on the left was the real-life inspiration for the design of Minas Tirith in the Lord of the Rings film. This is a great example of layered defense. Even if an attacker gets inside the outer walls, there are several more to get through. Unless, of course, you have a wind Nazgul flying around. So in Kerberos, which we're going to talk about quite a bit here, a user has a ticket which is used to gain access to a resource. The ticket granting ticket, or TGT, is the authentication ticket. That's the first ticket you get when you log on. At that point, use that to get a TGS, a ticket granting service ticket, which provides access to the Kerberos-enabled service. The key point of this graphic is that the data is written when the ticket is created, including the group membership. So let's walk through this flow. So a user logs on with the username and password. The password is converted to the NTLM password hash, which is used as part of that authentication ticket request. The TGT request is part of the step 1, which is the AS request. And the DC checks the user information, such as the logon restrictions, the group membership, et cetera, and creates a TGT. The TGT is encrypted with the domain KerbTGT account, and only that account can open and read it, which means only the DC can view it. So it sends it back to the user as part of the step 2, which is the AS response. Then the user wants to access a resource when you log in, like an Exchange server or a share. So then you have step 3, which is that TGS request, where that TGT it got in step 2 is sent back to the domain controller to say, hey, it's still me. I need this service ticket. And then the domain controller goes ahead and checks the TGT by checking to see if it can open it, does pack validation to see if the checksum checks out, and then delivers the TGS to the user based on the information that was already provided. At that point, the user connects to the server hosting the service in step 5 as part of an AP request, and presents that TGS, that service ticket, and says, OK, this is who I say I am. And then the application server, the service on that, opens up that TGS, and if it's valid, then checks to see if the user should have access. If mutual authentication is required, then step 6 happens, but that really doesn't happen. And the part in orange pretty much never happens, which is pack validation of that actual TGS that goes to the application server. So the key points to this process is that Microsoft uses the NTLM password hash for Kerberos RC4 encryption. This is going to come into play later. Kerberos policy is also only checked when that TGT is created, and the TGT is the user authenticator to the DC. So if I have a TGT and I present it to the DC believes that I am me. So if I get someone else's TGT and present it to the DC, it's going to believe that I am that person. And the DC only checks the user account after the TGT is 20 minutes old to see if the user's account is valid and enabled. So there's some interesting things with that. And as I mentioned, the TGS pack validation only occurs in specific circumstances. Effectively, if it runs as a service, pack validation is optional, meaning it's disabled by default. So let's talk about offense and what attackers are after, other than maybe sharks with freaking laser beams on their heads. Attackers have two primary goals: data access and persistence. So attackers aren't always the people out on the internet trying to get in. Insiders have that persistence and want to find the juiciest data to extract. Well, if you work with computers, either on the InfoSec side or as an admin, it's time to learn PowerShell, if you haven't already. Dave Kennedy called PowerShell Bash for Windows. It's that powerful. PowerShell is a built-in Windows component in all supported versions of Windows, well, at least starting next week when Windows 2003 goes end of life. And it provides access to WMI and COM, leveraging the .NET framework. It's a Microsoft binary, at least PowerShell.exe is, so it's whitelisted, and blocking it can break things, especially Exchange, or other Microsoft apps, and login scripts, and a lot of other things. But the thing that attackers love about PowerShell is that it can download and execute code from in memory from the internet using a command called invoke expression and the .NET download function, which makes it a favorite attack platform. So if you do nothing else, check out the PowerSploit GitHub repository, because this is what attackers are using quite extensively. Specifically, invoke Mimikatz, which enables Mimikatz to run in memory. It's a PowerShell version. And it enables dumping credentials without touching anything or ever touching disk. Get GPP password finds and decrypts the passwords in group policy preferences, which we'll talk about in a minute. And PowerView includes great tools for finding what computers admins are logged on to. So the easiest way for service discovery when an attacker is on the network doing recon is by something I call spin scanning, which is leveraging standard LDAP queries using and looking for service principal names, or spins. These are the signposts that are used to identify a service on a server that supports Kerberos authentication. The service registers its spin in Active Directory, associating it with the computer or the user object if it's using a service account. And spin scanning enables service discovery without network port scanning. So basically, you can see that the SQL server has a spin associated with it. What's in blue is the service, the spin type or class. And then what's in orange is the FQDN of that server. Often it's the BIOS name as well. And then at the end, you see after the colon is the port that it's running on. So I can scan the entire Active Directory forest and find out all the SQL servers that are there and what ports they're running on. Now, it may not show the port, but it may show the instance, which is just as valuable. So I wrote a PowerShell script that does this. And it just simply looks for that MS-SQL service principal name. Now, this can be run as an admin, this can be run as a user, no admin rights are required. And it leverages the functionality you get in PowerShell version 2, which is on Windows 7 2008 R2 by default. So as you can see here, you can get a lot of information as a user about what's out there as far as SQL goes, such as the SQL service account on the bottom. So getting domain admin in Active Directory. Unfortunately, there's a belief that getting DA rights in most enterprises is difficult. I've spoken to a number of pen testers and red teamers, and pretty much they say that closing in on 100%, they get to domain admin in hours, maybe a couple of days. They're taking their time, it takes a week. But realistically, in a lot of enterprises, it's way too easy. And there's several different ways an attacker escalates access from a user on the system to domain admin. Because generally speaking, admins, like most people, often hit the easy button and don't think out of the box or bag. The service account passwords rarely change, even if there's policy. So let's talk about service accounts. You can also spin scan for service accounts. I found this to be the most reliable way to find service accounts in Active Directory, because these accounts that you find through here are the accounts that are running as a service on the server. And this is much better than trying to search within Active Directory for service in the name or SVC in the account or what have you. And the script discovers all the service accounts, which are those user accounts with the associated spin, in the Active Directory for us and provides this level of information. And I can see here that this SQL agent is running on a lot of different SQL servers that I could check and target. An attacker can crack service account passwords without admin access or communication to the target server. If you are using service account passwords that are the same length as your domain password minimum, you need to change that. So here's the scenario. The attacker gets a foothold on a computer and requests the TGS ticket, that service ticket, from the domain controller. Maybe this is the attacker that has malware running on that system and requests it on behalf of the user. The user never sees it. Okay, so we go ahead and target those service accounts we mentioned and showed in the last slide. We get the service tickets for those services, get those onto the system. They go into memory. They're in the user space. I can extract them from memory, save them as a file. Then I can upload them to a web server or a website on the internet. And then I can have my computer that I own somewhere else connect to that, pull down those ticket files, and run a tool that's Python-based called Kerberos against it. And then Kerberos is going to tell me which passwords are associated for those service principal names or those TGS tickets, which are associated with the service account. So without access to the domain controller, without admin access on the network, I've now cracked service accounts within the domain without any unusual activity in the environment. And if your service account passwords are weak or using regular words and phrases, then I have it. And if one of these is a member of domain admins, then it's game over. So Tim Medine released Kerberos at DerbyCon last year, so this is publicly available on the internet. In 2006, Microsoft bought Desktop Standards Policymaker, which they rebranded and re-released with Windows Server 2008 as Group Policy Preferences. Well, Group Policy Preferences provides useful capability to leverage group policy to deploy scheduled tasks with explicit credentials and change the local admin passwords on their computers, a large number of computers at once, pretty much every computer in the OU. The credential password is AES 256-bit encrypted, which should be good enough, except Microsoft published it on MSDN. So the private key for this encryption is available on MSDN, which means that the attackers can just take the encrypted blob of data, run an AES decrypt against it using this AES key, and get the credentials. This issue was first identified publicly in January 2012 by Emilian Geralt in the blog post Exploiting Windows 2008 Group Policy Preferences. And just a few months later, Chris Campbell posted about it and wrote some PowerShell code to do this. This is now part of PowerSploit. So all of the domain group policies are in this top location. So all an attacker has to do is search this location for XML files. Those XML files that have credentials have a cpassword attribute, which has that random blob of data. By using that decrypt, the AES decrypt function, we can take that blob of data and decrypt it. That's a pretty good password. But now the attacker has it. Again, if that's a domain admin credential, the attacker owns the network. Well, Microsoft fixed this, kind of. 2 years after the issue was identified and exploited, there's a patch. MS14025 released last year. But this must be installed on all of the computers that are used to manage group policy. And all it does is stop you from putting in the credentials, but the issue is that if you already have group policy preference credentials that are in sysvol, this doesn't remove them. So you do have to go back and check. Microsoft has a script to scan sysvol to let you know if you have this issue or not. So even if there are no domain admin credentials in group policy preferences, the same local admin account credentials across multiple computers can lead to widespread compromise. Standard OS build image admin passwords are set at install and usually never change. So attackers love this because a single system compromise quickly escalates and can move laterally across all these other systems because they have the exact same local admin account and password. And all they have to do is find one computer that a domain admin is logged onto, and again, it's domain over. Mimikatz. It's a Windows program created by Benjamin Delpy in 2007 to learn more about Windows credentials. These are just some of the Mimikatz's capabilities. And for this talk, we'll be focusing on credential theft and injection. The items listed with an asterisk require debug or system rights. And the PowerSploit tool, invoke Mimikatz, provides Mimikatz functionality in PowerShell. And I use both interchangeably, both invoke Mimikatz and Mimikatz, because they effectively invoke Mimikatz as Mimikatz. So let's look at what it does. It dumps credentials from LSASS. That's a protected space in memory in Windows, which includes any accounts that have logged on recently. You can see here it shows the clear text password for users, which may include credentials from admins that have logged on days or even weeks ago. So log off properly or reboot. Now, Microsoft fixed this again in Windows 8.1 and 2012 R2, since they don't store these passwords in reversible form where you can see the clear text here, or in the LM hash is not stored here either. KB 2871997, which came out last spring, backports this into Windows 7 and 2008 R2, which enables better clearing of credentials in LSASS. And there's a reg key that you can enable with this patch, which will prevent that clear text password from being stored in LSASS. Again, it's reversible, but it's effectively clear text. And as you can see on the right, if I have a service configured with explicit credentials, those credentials are in LSASS. So if a server gets compromised that has credentials running as domain admin, the attacker, after they can dump these credentials, now has domain admin access on the network. Don't use built-in groups. Create custom delegation. Members of print operators and account operators can log on to domain controllers by default. So if you are using account operators or print operators in the domain, you need to stop doing that. And you can do that by modifying the group policy that applies to domain controllers. Change this group policy, please. Because if this is the scenario, the situation in your enterprise, an attacker can compromise a single help desk account to potentially compromise the domain. So there are two primary options for an attacker. Dump credentials using code directly on the DC or remotely. Or two, copy the DIT from somewhere that exists on the network to an attacker-controlled system. So let's look at what Mimikatz can do. We can dump credentials from LSASS on the DC. We can dump credentials from the Active Directory database on the DC. And this curb TGT account password hash is most useful because it enables the attacker to create golden tickets, the one in yellow. Or we could use the default administrator account at the top and pass the hash and just continue with that. But when that password changes, we can't do anything with it. Of course, there's no need for custom software because we can use Task Manager to do an LSASS process dump. It dumps LSASS to a file as part of a dump file. It won't provide all the domain credentials on a DC, but it will provide some interesting ones. And Mimikatz can use this dump file in the same manner as when it connects to LSASS. So we can still get the same information out without using any custom software on the DC or on the server. We can also use WMIC, which is a remote WMI function, to run code or run a command on a remote system, which is built into Windows and has been there for years. We can also use PowerShell remoting to do the same thing. Effectively, this will create or copy an existing volume shadow copy backup. Copy the files from the VSS snapshot to the local computer, and then we have what we need. We have the DIT file. Screenshot shows the attacker used the clear text password discovered earlier using Mimikatz, but if we don't have that, we just pass the ticket that we may have stolen from another user right in and use WMIC to connect to the DC. So NTDS util is the command utility for natively working with the Active Directory database and enables IFM set creation for DC promo. IFM is used for DC promo to install from media, so the server that is being promoted to a domain controller doesn't have to copy all that domain data from another DC across the network, which can save a lot of time if you have a large domain. The IFM set is a copy of the NTDS.dit file and created in this instance in ctemp. This file may be staged on a share for copying to a server that's going to be promoted to a DC, or it may be found on a new server that has not even been promoted yet, which may not be properly secured. And this does happen in large environments with lots of DCs. And this file may not be properly secured, and if it's not properly secured, that's a problem. Because an attacker may be able to grab the NTDS.dit file off of the backup share or virtual DC storage. If you have virtual DCs, you have some thinking to do, because you want to make sure that any network accessible location with DC data is properly secured. Losing control of this DC data from years ago can result in a full AD compromise, since the KERB-TGT account password doesn't change. Only domain admins should have access to this DC data. That's not always the case. And if someone else does, they're effectively domain admins. Do you run VMware? Well, vCenter admins are full VMware admins in that environment. And they're able to clone a virtual DC and copy the data to a local hard drive without ringing any alarm bells or any Active Directory security alerting. There's no event logs that occur in AD when this happens. And if your vCenter admin group is in Active Directory, you might want to change that. You want to delegate the proper rights to the appropriate groups. Don't provide an attacker the ability to backdoor Active Directory through a server admin account. And your virtual admins need to be considered domain admins, because once an attacker has the NTDS.dit file, they have all of the Active Directory credentials. This screenshot is from a Kali box with the impacted Python tools installed. The DIT is dumped using the secrets dump Python script in Impacket. And it's easy. You get the DIT, you own the domain. And I've highlighted the KERB-TGT account password hash here. So while pass the hash gets all the press, really any credential theft and reuse is bad. Key to this is protecting the credentials of your high-level admins, your domain admins, your enterprise admins, any delegated admin group. Attackers will often steal and reuse the Kerberos tickets. But better than that, if I'm an attacker and I can get the NTLM password hash, I can convert that into a Kerberos ticket. And the password hash, that NTLM password hash, doesn't change until the user changes their password. So I can use it in something called Overpass the hash, where I basically inject this NTLM password hash into the local system using Mimikatz, and then request a Kerberos ticket as part of the normal process. Because Mimikatz clears the keys and puts the NTLM hash into the Kerberos service provider. So that way, when I connect to a Kerberos-enabled service, it does the normal Kerberos stuff, but with the NTLM password hash that I've injected. And this hash is used to get those Kerberos tickets while connecting to the resources. Pass the hash is detectable. I mean, you look for Windows event 4624. And you can see that. So if I'm an attacker, why would I use something that's detectable? Why not use this? Kerberos tickets are normal. Nobody's going to see that. November 18, 2014, so about almost a year ago, Microsoft released the MS14068 patch to fix a major issue in how the Kerberos service validated the PAC validation or the PAC checksum on Kerberos tickets. MS11013 was the last patch relating to this, so this has happened before. And the MS14068 exploit enables a domain user to modify their Kerberos ticket to become a domain admin. And the best description of this is writing pilot on your boarding pass. As you get on the plane, hand it to the flight attendant, you're escorted to the cockpit, and then you're asked if you like coffee before you take off. I mean, this is really bad. And exploiting this vulnerability takes 5 minutes. PyKek was the first published exploit of MS14068, and that was 2 weeks after the patch was released, written by Sylvia and Monet. PyKek is a Python script that runs on any Python-capable system. Raspberry Pi, maybe, which can run anywhere on the network as long as it can communicate with an unpatched domain controller. So you run PyKek, you get a PyKek-generated Ccache file, and you inject that TGT into memory using Mimikatz for use as a domain admin. And using this ticket, access to the admin dollar share is granted. The mitigating factor here is that if you have a patched 2008 R2 DC, or 2008 DC, or if you have Windows 2012 or 2012 R2 DC in the same site, that ticket won't work or may not work depending on which DC you end up communicating with. But Benjamin Delpy of Mimikatz fame, he wrote his own Windows-based MS14068 exploit called Kekio, and it improves on PyKek. It finds and targets the vulnerable DCs in the environment and works regardless if there are patched or 2012 R2 DCs in the site. Same exploit path as PyKek, but it adds another step at the end, resulting in having a valid TGT, which can be presented to any DC in the domain. Whereas PyKek, the TGT that it had that checksum error. So if it was a patch DC, it would ignore it. It would kick up an error. What Benjamin's Kekio exploit does is it uses the exploit-generated TGT to get an impersonation TGT, which works everywhere. And Kekio is on GitHub. And this graphic shows the Kekio MS-14.068 exploit attempting to exploit each DC in the site one by one. The first highlighted packet in black is the Kerberos error response from a patch 2008 R2 DC. The blue highlight is the AS request to an unpatched 2008 R2 DC, which responds with an AS response. As we mentioned earlier, that's where you get your TGT. So we can see that this is searching for it. It found it. It exploited it. So user at admin in 5 minutes. 2 quotes from Mandiant's mtrends report, which was released earlier this year. 1, attackers compromise a few computers and quickly get domain admin rights. 2, once they get domain admin rights, they use Kerberos golden tickets to persist, even when all the domain passwords are reset. So let's look at Kerberos forging. Forging Kerberos tickets depends on the password hash available to the attacker. A golden ticket requires the Kerb TGT password data, while a silver ticket requires the service account password data. An attacker can create forged Kerberos tickets anywhere, even offline, and use anywhere on the network without elevated rights. Spoof access without modifying AD groups. Now, granted, they'd have to get domain admin rights in order to first have the Kerb TGT, but as I've shown, that can happen in a lot of enterprises. The Kerb TGT account encrypts and signs the pack in the service tickets, the TGS. As well as in TGTs, it actually encrypts it. So that way, the Kerb TGT is the only one that can open it. The Kerb TGT password does not change, except when raising the domain functional level from a lower level of 2008 or above. So if you're in a situation where you're running 2003, when you go up to 2008, it's going to change because there's AES encryption support. I've seen Kerb TGT accounts in environments which have passwords from 2002 and 2003, meaning they have never changed since the AD domain was stood up. So if compromised, this password needs to change twice since 2 passwords are kept for the Kerb TGT account. And both are valid for tickets. Microsoft posted a Kerb TGT password change script on TechNet earlier this year, which you can check out and test before using in production. Now, the Kerb TGT account has the same password last set date as when the domain was stood up until it's changed. The MSDS key version number increments each time the password is changed. And if the password last set date is the same as the account creation date, then you know it's never changed. The RDC, if you have a read-only domain controller in your environment, it has a Kerb TGT account shown on the bottom with those random numbers after it, which is cryptographically isolated from the domain Kerb TGT account. And it has a backlink attribute pointing back to the RDC it's associated with. Well, golden tickets became infamous, more famous, during Skip Duckwall and Benjamin Delpy's presentation at Black Hat last year in Vegas. The golden ticket is a valid TGT since it's encrypted and signed by the domain Kerb TGT account. It bypasses the security checks the DC typically does because the DC is not involved in its creation. It's used to get valid TGS service tickets from the DC in the AD forest and provides a great method for persisting on a domain with access to everything. Now you can see here there's no AS request or response. Steps 1 and 2 are skipped when you're using a forged TGT from the workstation, but everything else works just fine. So let's step through creating a golden ticket. First, we need the Kerb TGT account password hash. We can use the older method up top, or we can use the newer one down below, which gives us both the current and the previous version. We create a golden ticket using the account name Luke Skywalker, who's the domain admin in my lab, because he's awesome, who has the RID 2601, which belongs to Luke Skywalker. And Mimikatz uses the Kerb TGT account NTLM password as its service key. You can see service key there, to encrypt and sign the TGT. The group IDs listed are domain users, domain admins, group policy creator owners, schema admins, and enterprise admins. So this ticket, when I present it to the domain controller, it's going to say, I have full access on the domain. And as you can see on the bottom in the who am I, the local Windows box says I'm Joe user. Or I can create a fictional user. I can forge a golden ticket and say I'm Darth Vader, which doesn't exist on the network, and impersonate Luke Skywalker and spoof his access by using the same RID, 2601. Note that we could make up or impersonate a different account, such as a CEO or director of R&D, and use that RID, or even add Luke Skywalker's RID to the group ID field, which would still provide access to whatever access that person has, including all the groups that they're a member of. This means golden tickets can be customized to impersonate anyone with spoofed access to anything. Well, golden tickets seem pretty straightforward, but what are silver tickets? While a golden ticket is a forged TGT valid for gaining access to any Kerberos service in the network, the silver ticket is a forged TGS, which means that its scope is limited to whatever service is targeted on a specific server. The attacker needs a service account password hash, maybe using Kerberos, as we did earlier. In my opinion, silver tickets can be more dangerous than golden tickets. While the scope is more limited than golden tickets, the required hash can be easier to get. And there's no communication with the domain controller. So if you're logging your security events on your DCs, you may never see this. So, silver ticket exploitation scenario. Company S was breached. Just fill in the name. The attacker dumped all of the AD credentials, so corporate IT decided, all right, instead of rebuilding the whole thing, which will take us years and we'll go bankrupt, let's disconnect from the internet, change all our user accounts, our service accounts, our admin accounts, and the Kerb TGT, we're going to change it twice, so that way the golden tickets can't be used if they were using that. But the attacker still has the domain controller password hashes for the associated AD computer account. So let's see what we can do with those. Well, we're going to create a silver ticket spoofing Luke Skywalker, because he's our buddy. And we're going to target the CIF service on the domain controller, which provides access to the Windows file system, $, $, et cetera. And this enables the attacker to connect to the Windows shares on the DC as a domain admin. So once the silver ticket is created and injected, we can access the $, share on the DC and copy our exploit script to C Windows Temp or somewhere more interesting. Well, that's nice, but how do we get it to run? Well, we create another silver ticket impersonating Luke Skywalker again, because he's going to show up in the logs for all this activity. Targeting the host service on the DC, which provides access to several internal Windows components, which the service host automatically covers. This enables creation of a scheduled task. So we use the silver ticket for host to create or modify the scheduled task on the target DC to run the uploaded exploit script. Of course, we use an innocuous-sounding name or replace an existing one that's valid, and we confirm that it's ready to run. So yeah, our SCOM agent health check is ready to run. Excellent. So what happens when it runs? Well, we've recompromised the domain. So with the computer account password hash, an attacker can compromise the computer. If that computer is a DC, an attacker can compromise the domain, all using silver tickets. Well, by default, the computer account passwords change every 30 days, and 2 passwords are stored on the computer account by default, much like the Kerb TGT. And pack validation won't solve this because these services are system services. We can create silver tickets also for the WS-MAN and HTTP service, and then we can use PowerShell remoting to connect to the DC to do the exact same thing. But then we have a shell. So let's talk about something new. There's another Kerberos ticket that can be forged in order to maintain persistence. Let's talk about trust tickets, or the other TGT. When a trust is created, there's a shared password called an inter-realm key. This exists for all trusts, whether created by an admin or automatically when adding a new domain to an Active Directory forest. So after a user in the blue domain is already logged on and wants to access a resource in the green domain across a trust, the DC in the blue domain creates and sends a new TGT to the user, along with a referral to the green domain DC. This cross-trust TGT is formatted the same as any TGT, but it's not signed by the Kerb TGT account for either of these domains. It's signed and encrypted with the inter-realm key of the forest trust. So if we can get access to this trust password, then we can forge this cross-domain ticket, which means that we can impersonate any user in the blue domain and get access to any service or resource in the green domain that has been permissioned for the blue domain. So let's see how this works in practice with an external trust. So we're going to have a domain here and a domain here, two different forests. One trusts the other. Note that with the trust password, also called the trust key, it can be extracted along with all user data when dumping AD credentials on the top. That external $ is a computer account, effectively. Each trust has an associated user account, which contains that NTLM password hash, as you can see at the top. This data can be used to forge trust tickets. We use the trust password for the external trust to create the trust ticket file. And the trust password is the same as what I use to create it. So to create a trust in another forest, what often happens is an admin is over here and types in a password. And oftentimes that password is emailed over to the other admin in the other forest, and they type it in over here as well. Well, that doesn't change for 30 days, which means anyone who has the knowledge of that trust password during those 30 days can create a trust ticket and impersonate users in that blue domain and access resources in the green domain. In order to do this, we use Mimikatz again, and the process is very similar as creating a golden ticket. In fact, it's the same command, just with different options. The service key is the trust password hash, and the target is the target domain FQDN. So we create that trust ticket file. We use it in an AskTGS Kerberos tool that Benjamin Delpy wrote, and we request a TGS for service in that targeted domain. That resulting TGS, we save it to a file, and then we inject it. And then we can access a share that we shouldn't be able to access. So we can use this to access any resource in the target domain granted access to users in the source domain. We can just spoof them. We can impersonate them. The limitation here is that the trusting domain, that domain that we're trying to get access to, the resources that are located there, has to have explicit permissions set for groups or users in the trusted domain, the domain where we're coming from. However, a lot of these things tend to be the way over permissioned, which means that it's possible that we could get domain admin rights in that green domain just by virtue of creating a trust ticket. Let's see how this works between domains in an AD forest. Mimikatz can now extract all trust data from the Active Directory domain. Note that the trust key doesn't change for 30 days based on the trusting domain machine account policy setting. Same command as earlier. Service key is the trust password, and the name target is the target domain FQDN. We run through the same process. We inject it. But once this target is passed, the user is an enterprise admin for the AD forest and has DA rights to the DC in the target domain. So even if we've compromised that one domain in the AD forest, it's a child domain, we can now compromise the parent and become an EA in the entire forest. Now, golden tickets don't really help with this because a golden ticket is limited to its own domain, unless that domain is the root domain, the parent domain, and hosts the EA group. This gets around that. So in a multi-domain AD forest, each domain has a trust with at least one other domain, and each trust as an associated password can be used to forge trust tickets. So we can compromise that one domain to potentially compromise another. Reducing the AD computer account policy can mitigate this attack since the trust passwords are changed on a schedule and can be changed more frequently. So the best mitigation, of course, is don't let attackers run code on your DCs. So let's talk defense. Computer security defense sometimes feels like it's 300 versus 300,000. Blue team activity should align with one of these items. Each of these should raise the bar, making the attacker's job more difficult. Really, what we need to do is set up as many hoops as possible that attackers have to jump through them, which increases the potential that they'll tip their hand and let us know that they're on our network. The MS-14068 exploit packets can be detected on the wire. According to the Kerberos spec, a TGT might actually be requested without a pack, but a TGS shouldn't. So if you create IDS SIGs that are set up this way, you can detect when these are being used. So at the beginning of this year, I identified indicators to detect golden tickets and silver tickets. I discovered events relating to forged Kerberos tickets don't correctly include the domain information. Forged Kerberos tickets have a blank domain name or a domain FQDN instead of the short domain name or NetBIOS name. And while detection of this type is never 100%, it worked great identifying when forged tickets were used. Subsequently, Mimikatz was updated in April, and the domain field is now shown on the bottom. So any use of newer Mimikatz versions will likely have the domain field set on the bottom unless they're customized. Note that the golden ticket events are on the DCs, and silver tickets will be on that targeted server, unless, of course, that targeted server is the DC. So if you're not pulling security events from your other servers, in addition to your DCs, you may want to look at that. And this is an example. This is what gets logged when we create that fictional user, Darth Vader, using a SID that doesn't exist. That SID doesn't resolve because it doesn't exist. And then this is where we say the account name is Darth Vader, and we use Luke Skywalker's RID. So there's some unusual things that show up in these events. If you have a DC without the MS14068 patch, you may see these events on the DC when an MS14068 TGT is used. The key point to this slide, ensure your DC build process involves patching the server with MS14068 before running DC promo. If you don't do that, you will very likely get compromised. So PowerShell. A lot has been talked about in PowerShell the past year or so. Embrace, don't block it. PowerShell is a tool just like the others that could be abused. If the attacker's not going to use PowerShell, they're going to use WMIC, they're going to use WMI, they're going to use VBScript, they're going to use anything they can. PSExec. And note that blocking the PowerShell.exe doesn't stop PowerShell from being run. PowerShell is part of the Windows Management Framework, which works under the covers. And the execution policy is not a security method. So you want to limit PowerShell remoting by using WinRM, and if possible, disable PowerShell remoting on DCs. Once you have PowerShell v3 enabled, or v3 out there, you can enable PowerShell module logging, which writes all of the code that shows up in PowerShell into the operation, the PowerShell operation log. You can pull that back into your event monitoring system and actually see what's going on in your environment, which makes it easier to detect offensive PowerShell usage. Better yet, leverage metering, like if you have SCCM, which a lot of organizations do, or something similar. Check to see who's running PowerShell. If you have a user that's been executing PowerShell on a whole bunch of systems in the last 4 hours, that's probably bad. But it's time to start evaluating and identify how people are using these tools. That way, when something bad happens, you know that it's abnormal. And you can also track PowerShell remoting usage through NetFlow data or check the event logs. On the client, it's event ID 06. On servers, it's event ID 400. PowerShell version 5 will be out very soon and has several compelling security enhancements. System-wide transcripts. Use group policy to have PowerShell log all system PowerShell commands and save them as transcripts to a share for parsing. Script block logging. PowerShell logs the obfuscated code as well as the dynamic generated code, and that way you have the exact code that executes. Constrained PowerShell automatically enables PowerShell constrained mode when app locker policy is set to allow. This limits the PowerShell code execution policy where it's only the core capability. The advanced capability, which the attacker tools use, won't work. And then Windows 10 adds anti-malware integration, which automatically passes all of that code that would be executed into the anti-malware software product that you have installed. And if it sees something malicious, PowerShell won't run it. So mitigation. Level 1 is what I consider as low difficulty. There's a lot on this slide. The key points are minimize your admin rights. Prevent local admins from logging on to other computers. Protect service accounts by making their passwords longer. Don't use group policy preferences to store your credentials. Prevent credentials from being passed when using RDP. Level 2, a little more moderate difficulty to install, to configure. Ensure your local admin passwords are random and regularly change with the capability to force a change within hours. And additional service account protections are necessary. 2003 is end of life very soon, so you want to kick them off the network as soon as you can. Don't let admins use admin credentials on the same computer as they use for office tasks, such as web browsing, email, et cetera, and log your PowerShell usage. Then we get into its complicated level of mitigation. With that said, there are tremendous benefits to implementing these mitigations. And the most important takeaway from this slide is protect your 80 admins from credential theft. The best way to do that is to empty your domain admins group. Domain admins have full admin rights to Active Directory, all domain controllers, all server, all computers, all workstations. Does that make sense today? DA is administration from the 1990s, and it's time to shift to a focus on credential protection, away from the way we used to do things. And this old admin model needs to be revamped to protect against these current threats. And the separation of administration is necessary to ensure that a compromise at one level doesn't compromise your entire domain, because when that happens, you're in for a world of hurt. And you want to make sure that this new admin model is configured so your domain admins or your AD admins are only logging on DCs or special admin workstations, special admin servers, and not your standard workstations that everyone logs on to. All this can be enforced by group policy. And additionally, smart card authentication can enable you to rotate those password hashes via script. With more advanced attacks that verge on becoming undetectable, a new attack method or attack detection paradigm is necessary. Microsoft bought Arado late last year and have rebranded the required technology into Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics. So Microsoft is listening. I don't work for them, but this is pretty cool. Basically, it taps the network device with a sensor and watches that authentication traffic going to the DCs. And it starts baselining what the user behavior is, and based on that, it says this is abnormal or this is normal. It can detect a lot of these current modern attacks. It's currently in preview, but Microsoft's looking to release it soon. I'm pretty excited about it. This is an example of what fires when it sees something unusual. It goes, hey, this guy logged on to 9 abnormal computers and usually only logs on to these 2 over here, and asked for resource, wanted to access all these other resources, never touched them before. So starting with Windows 10, there's a new architecture to protect credentials. On the right side in blue is traditional OS, called the high-level OS. This is where LSAS runs and traditionally where credentials are stored. But they've moved them over to the isolated user mode, into a new service called LSA-LSO. It's a separate microkernel which runs on its own. So a compromise of Windows itself, the Windows kernel, cannot compromise those credentials. They are protected. And you probably have noticed that this sits on a hypervisor. So it's completely separated from the actual Windows OS. So there's a few other mitigations that are highly recommended, ranging from periodically validating scheduled tasks on sensitive systems, isolating systems from the internet that don't need it, monitoring the event logs at a level that we may not have looked at before, implementing comprehensive password change strategy, which involves domain computer password changes when we have a breach recovery scenario, scheduling regular KERB-TDT account password changes, and mapping known APT activity to potential threat vectors within your organization. So to summarize, attackers will get code running on your network. They will get code running on a computer in your environment. What happens next is up to you. And my time is up. Thank you. Which one? Okay. Okay, I got the request for level 1 again. Questions? No questions? Did I shock everyone?
No, it's like I'm going to take it several days to digest.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a thank you slide. There's been a lot of work done. I've only done a small amount of it. These are the people you want to follow because they do awesome work. And thanks, of course, to my wife and family for putting up with me being on the computer every night. And my contact information is on the bottom. Thank you.